Mino Line Media presents the Business First Podcast.
Hi all, and welcome to a new episode of Business First with Sonia Alleyne. I am your host. And today we have an exciting guest in the studio. She is someone who has done a lot. And I'm always fascinated by people who have multiple talents and interests because we're often told to just focus on one thing. And so I'm happy that she's here to talk about her broad talent, her broad interest, all that she's done, all that she's planning to do. And that we can unpack some of her history, and hopefully there will be great lessons for you to take away. She is a film, television, and Broadway actress who has also been a corporate professional and business consultant. She holds 3 degrees from MIT, Stanford, and Harvard. She's been producing films. She started a production company. Please welcome Salma Qarnain. Hi, Salma.
Hi, thank you so much, Sonia, for having me on.
Thank you for being here. And so, as I said in the introduction, you have a broad range of experiences. And so, if we go back to when you were a little girl and you were trying to figure out what you'd want to be in this world, what was that? What was going on in your head, or what was going on in your family? Sometimes, our families can impact what we think we want to do in life, and until we kind of come into our own. So, what was that like for you coming up and deciding how you were going to show up in the world today?
How much time do we have? This is hilarious. I think there's so much to unpack here for me because I grew up, I was born actually in the UK to Pakistani parents, and we emigrated to the US when I was very, very young. But, I was somebody who was in between worlds. So, I was American, but also Pakistani, and had that as my identity. And we would go back to Pakistan to visit our family quite often. So for me, my dreams from when I was very little, so age 4 to 5, what I can remember is that I wanted to be a singer. And in fact, I loved music. And it was something that, I always just invigorated me. So I knew that, what I'd love to do in the future was just to entertain. And started thinking about that. But, with my parents being immigrants to the United States, we really didn't have any support when we were here and got here. We didn't have family when we were here. And my parents were very insistent that in having 4 girls, that we all were financially independent. And entertainment wasn't a path to that in terms of what they saw as successful. But what I would say is that my dad's father, my grandfather, was a film director, writer, producer in India and Pakistan in the 40s and 50s. But he passed away when he was in his 40s. So film was always in my family's bloodline, but it was something that had left my dad's family, for the most part, destitute. So the way and the path forward and what success meant for his family and also for my mother's family was education. And that pathway was either you're going to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, because that's how you'll be financially stable. So that was absolutely passed on to me and my sisters.
Yeah.
Even though we loved as a family to watch film, to sing and dance and reenact different stories with our dolls and things like that. So we had very active imaginations, but it wasn't something that was going to be pushed to the forefront for us from a career perspective. But I always had it in the back of my mind because I loved singing so much and then acting. But like I said, thinking about what the career path was going to be, it had to be within that doctor, lawyer, engineer path. And for me, I was very interested in, honestly, anything that I saw. So TV influenced me and film influenced me quite a bit. And what struck my imagination the most when I was, a very young child was Star Wars. And in seeing that, it made me want to think of, becoming an astronaut or becoming a scientist. And I had that dream for a while until I realized my eyesight was not good enough and I would never be a pilot. I wouldn't qualify for the space program. And that was at about 12. And so then after that, I started to think, well, maybe I'll be a lawyer because I used to watch a lot of Perry Mason.
Right.
And I knew that lawyers made money. And I used to ask, my dad's friends what they did, how much money they made, just because we also we weren't well to do growing up. We were very much middle class. And it was something that, was prominent in my mind in terms of being financially independent and making a way for myself in the United States. So ultimately, what happened was I was very good at math and science. One of my teachers told me that I should look into what an engineer does because I really had no idea. And I attended a Society of Women Engineers program for a weekend at Purdue University because at that point we were living in Indiana near Purdue. And I went to that and what I realized was, oh my goodness, so an engineer can actually build the spaceships? Because as I said before, I was really interested in space and love science fiction, wanted to be an astronaut. But when I discovered, I can build these, that's when I started looking for programs in engineering. But always in the back of my mind, I had wanted to act and sing. And so I was in the drama club in school. And when I went to college, you could either find me on stage with the student-run theatrical society at Stanford called Ram's Head, or in the lab. So that was my path. I carried this dual career for actually a long time.
Well, it's fascinating because the immigrant story, particularly those who have come to the United States, is usually the same, right? Where the parents they didn't understand the creative avenue for being able to maintain yourself. As you mentioned, it had to be medicine, law, or engineering. And so, but it's interesting. What I've never heard in the immigrant story is someone to say that they did have a grandparent who was in the creative field. And so I would imagine in the 1940s, that might have been your grandfather was somewhat of a pioneer in film in India.
Yes, and in fact, he and his brothers had started a company called Fuzzly Brothers, and there they did look to make actually Muslim-based, stories as well, because they were Pakistani. They eventually became Pakistani after partition, but in India they were Muslim filmmakers, which is also, was unique at the time. But once partition happened, they moved their families to Karachi in Pakistan, at which point, they continued to make films. But after my grandfather passed, that side of, the family was, like I said, for the most part, trying to survive in other ways.
Right. So one of the things we talked about in the introduction is that you are also producing now. And so in support of your grandfather's legacy, you've started a company with a partner called Black Man Films. And what I thought was interesting, I watched the trailer for The Silent Partner, which you released in 2021, which is an interesting concept given what was going on in 2020 with the riots of George Floyd and us being locked down and watching all of the protests and all of the racial discussions. And so here it is. Now you created a film where a Black professional has defended a white woman who's killed a Black teen, and this is his opportunity now because he's won this case for the law firm. It's his pathway to partner, which is, I can imagine, and it's a short. But I think from what I understand, you are going to be developing this into a much longer feature because it's so common for corporate professionals to deal with all of the trauma, the racism, the microaggressions as they are building their career path. And so what was it at that time in 2021 that that you felt, that you and your partner felt like this was a good film to release? And what is the message that you wanted people to take away from this?
Yeah, fantastic question. So this film is the brainchild of Roderick Lawrence, who is my producing partner. And he and I had met the year before doing an off-Broadway play. And he started to understand my background in business. And I had told him that I'd never met a stronger storyteller and that anything he wanted to do in terms of theater work or anything beyond that, I was interested in coming on as a producer because I was absolutely going to champion the type of work that he was doing. So once the pandemic began, which was really right after we met, um, he called me in June and said, I actually have an idea for a short film. If you're serious about producing, I'd like you to think about this. And he pitched the concept to me, which is essentially he was going through his own, and he'll tell you this, his own mental health journey. And he wanted to explore Black men's mental health. And what he discovered about himself was microaggressions, and that was affecting his own mental health. And wanted to tell a story that really showcased successful Black men and women in the workplace dealing with microaggressions and how that affected their lives, right? So for me, one, that was such a wonderful story to tell because in my own culture, in South Asian culture, you never talk about mental health. It's something that's swept under the rug. And in fact, my father was a psychiatrist. And so that it was actually unique, from a South Asian perspective too, in terms of the type of career you choose in the medical field. And so, I was very drawn into the concept. My niece and nephew are also Black. So my brother-in-law is Black, and here in the United States, they're going to present as Black. And in fact, and throughout the world, they'll be seen as Black. So for me, it was very important to tell stories that change hearts and minds around, what does it take for people of color to have success in a white world in which there's a lot of systemic racism and a lot of organizations that are just entrenched in it because of the history of the United States. So it's very, personal to me as well. So for those, three reasons, I immediately jumped on board. One, because I knew the storytelling was going to be the strongest storytelling that I could partner with, meaning with Roderick Lawrence. The second thing was that it was about mental health. And the third thing, that it was really about the Black community and creating something that could showcase, what people face on a daily basis. And in my own career in the corporate world, I have experienced microaggressions, but nowhere near to the point as what the Black community will face and has faced. So that was also something that, I knew I wanted to be involved in and to make it clear to, also the Asian community that they also have a responsibility to raise their voices in situations in the workplace when they see things like this happen and not be silent. Just because they might be considered a model minority doesn't mean that they are going to be exempt from, helping and allying themselves with people who, are facing some of these things on a day-to-day basis. So for me, it's all, very much, it was driven by the creativity of it, as well as just the mission behind it.
Yeah, the film has done extremely well at the film festivals. And so, during the creative process, when you present something to the world, you feel it's your best work, right? Because you wouldn't put it out there if you didn't feel that way. But then it has to be received by everyone that you in the intended audience. And so getting this feedback, getting the wins, getting the all of the positive reviews, what does that feel like after you've, particularly since it was such a hot topic story and such a emotional story? I mean, just even like I said, just from the trailer, you feel the intensity of the story. And so what does that feel like to get back such positive reviews on this work?
It was very rewarding on again a deep personal level, because what we wanted to do was drive conversation, and that was the point of this film. The point of the film wasn't to say, "Oh, look at what, this is a proof of concept for something larger," because at the time when we made it, it wasn't. It was something that we wanted to have discussions around. It was something that we were very passionate about. What we enjoyed the most was doing the Q&As at the film festivals, because we could hear from the audience what they felt and what their response was to that, and then hopefully give people the impetus to change behavior. So if they felt they were complicit in being a part of the systemic entrenched racism, what could they do to change their workplaces? How could they now speak up and out? And for people who, are going through it on a daily basis, for them, it's a release as well, right? And sharing their experiences, sharing their stories. That, I think, it had been the most rewarding part, not necessarily because you don't do anything. You don't create something necessarily for accolades, but you create something because you want to engage in a conversation. At least that's the way I see it. And that's the way, we at Black Men Films also see it, is that we want to create and engage people in conversation such that it can be a catalyst for change. The other thing that we realized in doing that was that people wanted more. People wanted more of the story. They wanted to discuss it more. They were wondering about the relationships that were shown and showcased in the film. They wanted to know why somebody would take a case like that. They wanted to have a payoff and see the characters who are kind of perpetrating a lot of the things in the film. They wanted them to have a different type of ending, right? So what we decided once we started hearing the reactions was that, this actually is bigger than a short film. This is either a series or it's a feature film. And since we did 21 festivals, we won 8 awards or nominations. We also qualified for the Oscars at the end of the day. So with all of that, it just became clear that we needed to develop into something bigger. So we're actually in pre-production right now to shoot the feature version in December.
Yeah. How difficult is it? And I think for creatives like you, right, who create to impact feelings in people or to inspire people to change, how difficult is that in an industry where they just want the next big thing, or they just want the next hot thing? And how do you balance that reality of, well, will this make money? Will people watch it? And I want to create something that people want to watch, but I also want it to have impact.
Mm-hmm. It's a balancing act, as you said, meaning that as a creative producer, which I am, because I'm coming at it from both a business background plus a creative background, you have to develop something that you're going to be passionate about, first of all, because you're going to be living with it day to day for a few years. So it's something that you really want to tell and want to have a conversation about. And then make sure that you are producing at the highest level with the resources that you have, right? And finding collaborators who share the vision and can shepherd that story. So being as very intentional as you can be with the things that make the story what you want it to be. And then from the business side, you start thinking about, okay, well, here's the story. What is the right audience for it? Where should it go? How should it be distributed? What is the right sizing of that as well? Who do we need to collaborate on that side to make it work? What distributors should we contact? How should we market this film? So there is a lot to to balance, because ultimately you don't want to, or at least we don't want to change
Right.
our story because of a market that, might demand certain things of us. So it's really for us about kind of keeping the purity of the story, keeping it unapologetic, keeping it authentic, shepherding that vision, because we don't want to change the message that story is telling. And it's very important that it is felt and seen and people are moved by it, because it's a very original, something that people are going to see and be extremely, I think, moved by, be it'll make them think, hopefully differently. And I think it's very needed and relevant. So for all those reasons, when you are creating something that is art, you really have to protect it as much as you can. Now, if you're making something that is extremely commercial and you're trying to make a quote unquote hit, everybody's trying to make a hit.
Nice.
There is no there is no magic formula to a hit unless, if someone had it, they'd be creating hits all the time, right? But we, like I said, are very intentional about the type of work that we're doing. We're intentional about who we're putting in front of and behind the camera, because our mission is to elevate Black and Brown artists. So we want to make sure we're collaborating and finding those incredibly talented Black and Brown artists who are going to form the majority of our crew, the majority of our cast. And it is something that actually people are starting to demand more and more and more. So if you look at the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report that just came out, what it was saying was that at the box office, people of color actually show up more at the box office. And they are watching stories in which people of color are the leads, or there's a majority of people of color in the cast. And that is a shift in Hollywood, because even the demographics of the United States are shifting, right? So, quote unquote, minorities or people of color will no longer be a minority in the United States by 2045. They'll actually start becoming a majority.
Right.
But one thing when you look at that report that's striking is that the number of leading actors in theatrical releases actually are underrepresented in the people of color category, because they're overwhelmingly white. So that's an area, and similarly with the directors and the writers, they're still overwhelmingly white in terms of when you look at the percentage of those categories. I think directors, it was 83%. Writers was something on the order of 87, 88% were white. Of the top 80, 89 films in 2022. So when people of color make up, 43, 44% of the US population today.
Right.
So it's incredibly skewed.
Yeah. Further to that, I noticed that you're also very passionate about when there is representation, that it's authentic, that it's, in fact, as you said, it's well-developed and well-rounded. That's so important to diverse audiences who are showing up at the theaters. And you mentioned that you actually had the opportunity to do that in one of the roles you played on Broadway in Life of Pi. And so tell us a little bit about that experience and how you were able to make and again, for general audiences, they may not get it, but for those folks that are culturally connected, it's really important that the character that we do see, even if it's a glimpse of them, that they are authentic.
I completely agree with that statement. The Life of Pi was such an incredible experience for me, because it really is one of the few times that I've played somebody who is South Asian, and when that is in fact my heritage, so it's very interesting. And part, I think, of the reason is that there aren't one, there are not as many South Asian writers here in the United States to write stories. But two, people's conception of what South Asian actually is very skewed, I think, in the United States versus what, you know,
Right.
somebody from outside of the country might think. But with Life of Pi, it was very comforting to me to actually get to play somebody who was very similar to me, which is she was a scientist, she was an aunt, so somebody who was also maternal, and a teacher. And I got to also play the other secondary character in that track was also Muslim. So for me, it was very just satisfying to be able to have my Broadway debut be in that role, which allowed me to be my full self and actually bring my culture and bring my experiences to bear on the role. So it was wonderful to actually be in collaboration with the director and the playwright and the other South Asian actors in the cast to create characters that were very fully South Asian. So for me, it was such a gift, like a career gift, to be able to do that, and then also to be able to bring that to life on a Broadway stage. In fact, 17 of us made our Broadway debuts, and you can probably guess what was the majority ethnicity that made their Broadway debuts in that show. But we had the largest Asian American cast at the time when we opened in March this past year. But it was an incredible run.
Wow.
We were nominated for 5 Tonys. We won 3. And it was just a beautiful story about people from South Asia, but you could still relate to the story because it's something that was, universal, about family, about love, about hope, about survival, about, PTSD and how to overcome any obstacles, even when we're in our darkest hour. So it very much could resonate with anybody who saw it. But I thought it was very, very meaningful to me to be able to finally play a character that actually, was very similar to who I am in real life.
And so in the beginning, we talked about all of your broad interests and your experiences. You are an immigrant. You are culturally diverse. You've worked as a scientist. You've studied in these elite halls of education. You've worked in Hollywood. You've worked on Broadway. What do you think that all of these experiences bring to each new project or each new job that you take on? Because I think you still work as a consultant as well in certain areas. So what do you take from each place that is really impactful and that really makes you good at what you do?
Well, thank you. I think the biggest thing, honestly, is the ability to be extremely resourceful and to come up with solutions and be very driven towards finding a solution to a problem. So what that means is that, I am incredibly optimistic and relentless. I think those are 2 key characteristics of mine, and enthusiastic, probably those 3. And when I see a problem with anything, it's like, okay, how can I fix it? What are the options? What solutions are here? What's on the table? How can we be creative about it? So it's bringing that creativity into, understanding what's in front of me. So a lot of what I've done in the past has been project management. So when you talk about engineering, I used to be in a project management role. I used to work at AOL for a long time, again, in project management, but also in business development and strategic planning. I have my MBA, so a lot of, interest and work in strategy. And all of those different things are really about problem solving, right? So it's how can you be very creative in your problem solving and come up with solutions that are also going to work for everybody. So how can you create solutions that are, maybe to use something that's an overused phrase, a win-win solution for everybody who's involved and all your stakeholders, because that is what I like to do, is figure out how can we all win in something together and have the same vision and march towards that vision and do it, efficiently and quickly as well. But I do think having a great team is key to that. And that's what I've learned along the way too, is that you can't be somebody who does it by yourself. You have to have a great team beside you and with you, some people who are very invested in that same vision, in that same mission.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to someone who's similar to you, right? Who has worked in a lot of different places, has because what's interesting about you is that you always knew that you wanted to be in entertainment, right? And you'd gone a few different ways before you got there. And that's not unlike a lot of people. Some people, I bet many people who are still in their jobs, right, wishing that they could do something else, or still in a position and wishing that they could be somewhere else. And so what would you say to people who are doing one thing but have a goal and a dream for something else, but they're not really sure how to take that next step, or they don't feel the confidence that they could survive in a place because they don't have the exact experience that would be required to succeed?
Essentially, I would tell them that it's never too late to start. You can always start at whatever point you are along your journey, and that you do have to actually try in order to start feeling successful around that particular thing. So it's all learning, right? It's all growing. And so you have to be in a constant mindset of growth and learning and being willing to put yourself out there and being willing to fail, right? So if you have the opportunity of being able to fail, then that is something that's going to be a huge asset to you. And I am naturally a little bit risk averse. So, growing up as an immigrant, I didn't want to be in a situation where I didn't know how I was going to eat the next day. I wanted to make sure I was financially independent. So for me, it was about doing theater on the side while I was working full time and continuing to have a parallel path up until the point where I felt confident that I could give up the corporate job such that I could pursue the creative side more fully, because my finances were in order at that point. So I had to feel like I could do it and gave myself the permission. But, like I said, if you're working towards it, you can build towards it slowly. You can build towards it a little bit faster by putting 100% of your focus on it. But just start is going to be my answer, and keep very, stay open-minded, stay curious, and always learn, because there's always something to learn. And that's going to be, I think, the key to success, is being willing, like I said, to fail and being willing to learn from it.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about Speak Up, Brother. That is the next film from Black Man Films.
Correct. It's actually out on the festival circuit right now. So Speak Up, Brother is an ode. It's an homage to 90s Black love stories, like Love Jones. Yeah, it was heavily inspired by by Love Jones, Love and Basketball, Poetic Justice. And it's a different type of film for us, because our first film is very much in the drama thriller world, and this one is a romance. But it still explores mental health, because the main character in this particular short has anxiety in communication. So it's also about how we communicate with people we love. So love languages is something in there, as well as it focuses on Black love in various forms: romantic love, sisterhood, brotherhood, but again, packed into 15 minutes. And so we've now been on the festival circuit since March, and we've been accepted to 11 festivals. And our first 9 festivals, we either won or were nominated for 5 Best Short awards. Yeah, so it's been an incredible run so far 5 of those 11 festivals that we've been accepted to are also Oscar qualifiers. So hopefully this one will also be able to make an Oscar run next year.
Wow, that is so exciting. And
Yeah.
so how can, outside of the festival circuit, is there a way to view these films or see them? Or is it really just through the festivals until they get it? I'm not sure of what the process is when you
Sure.
enter. Okay, so if you could help us with that.
Absolutely. Which short films don't have a path to distribution necessarily. That is something that features do. They have a stronger
Right.
path to distribution. So people could see features a little bit more easily than shorts. So shorts typically are viewed on the festival circuit. And with Silent Partner, no one can see that right now because we're developing the feature.
Right.
With Speak Up Brother, that's still on the festival circuit. So our next festival is this Sunday here in Brooklyn at the Real Sisters of the
I'm
Diaspora.
coming. It's
Are you?
here
So
in Brooklyn? No,
yeah,
I didn't
it's here in
know.
Brooklyn.
Yeah, so why wouldn't I come? Okay.
Please, I'll send you all the information.
Okay.
But it's here at the theater at City Tech, just down the street from me.
Oh, wonderful.
On Sunday at 4:45 p.m. this October 22nd. But then we're at I can't announce the next one yet. Okay. But then we're not at another one also in Manhattan coming up after that. But keep an eye out on our website, speakupbrother.com, or Instagram at speakupbrotherfilm.
Okay.
And that's BROTHA.
Right. Okay.
And there you can see where we are next.
All right. And so what about for all of your projects? If people want to stay in touch with you, or they want to see what Black Man Films is producing, they want to be able to see Silent Partner when it comes out, like when in the as a full feature, how can we stay in touch with you?
The best way is Instagram. So at Black Men Films LLC.
Okay.
Or at Silent Partner Film. And my personal Instagram is at Salma, SALMA .QARNAIN.
Okay.
So those are going to be the best ways. We also have websites dedicated to them as well, but most people are on social media versus click on the website. But if you do happen to click on the website, it is speakupbrother.com or silentpartner-film.com. Those are our 2 websites that'll have the most information in terms of where it's showing next.
Well, thank you, Salma, for coming on and sharing all of your background and your experiences. We will definitely be following you, and would love to have you back as these films are developing, as you're developing more films, and crossing fingers for an Oscar win. Like, that would be absolutely incredible. And what's next for you in terms of acting? Where can we see you, either on stage or in film, on TV?
So right now, I just did a musical reading of a new musical called Tambourine. That was last week, but I'm heads down in pre-production for Silent Partner. So until that's done, I'm not taking any more acting projects. And plus, SAG-AFTRA, we're on strike, and we don't have any TV or film coming up until the contracts are ratified, or unless I join a production just like our production that would be covered under the interim agreement.
Right.
So for, the new year, I'll be looking, but right now we're heads down focused on getting this feature up and running. Okay. And I would say in terms of our slate, we actually do have another project coming up that we were executive producers on, and actually Roderick Lawrence stars in it, but our EP/assistant director of Speak Up Brother, it's his directorial debut, and it's called Harlem Fragments. And that should be on the festival circuit next year. It's a beautiful story about actually divorce and how it affects a young child.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, we have all the handles, so we will be following you. And yes, much continued success. And we look forward to continuing this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. I am glad to come back at any time.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back again next week with another dynamic guest. Take care.
The Business First podcast is hosted and produced by Sonia Alleyne. Executive producer Ken Johnson. Find the Business First podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Odyssey, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcast. On social media on IG at business_first_podcast. Follow the Mean Old Line Media Podcast Network on IG at Mean Old Line Media. Get the Mean Old Line Media app in the App Store or Google Play. The Business First podcast is a Mean Old Line Media production.